Yeah, I think the biggest trouble for 20-year-olds and young people in general is just not having that perspective behind you, and you're going through a problem, and it is just I'm sure you can look back at the problems you had when you were 20 and see just how small they are, um, but they don't feel small because you don't have that in hindsight.
Hey everybody, welcome to today's podcast, the Jeff Heilman Project. For those of you who are listening and not watching online on our YouTube channel, welcome to the audio version. We are sitting here in our podcast booth with a very special guest star, I would like to thank. Aidan, would you like to introduce yourself to those that are listening?
Sure, I'm Aidan Heilman. I'm Jeff and Jessica's second born. And I'm happy to be here. This is my first time on the podcast, and very cool.
We are very excited to have you here. Joseph has just turned 23 this year, and you heard us talking about his trip to Bali, his most recent trip to Bali, and we were just talking about, traveling and getting out there. Speaking of getting out there and traveling, Jeff is not in the booth today. He is actually on the road. And where are you, Mr. Heilman?
I am taking some downtime, resting at the beach in Santa Barbara.
And for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with California, it's a very large state spanning from northern to southern California, and Santa Barbara, from where we're located, is about, how many miles is it from San Jose to Santa Barbara, Jeff?
I think it's about 250.
250, but with traffic, 250 can
Yeah,
feel like about 2,000.
Yeah, and the Starbucks visit of Keanu Reeves took me a little off track for a couple of minutes there. Took a little longer because I was caught up in the aura of the event.
That's funny. For those that don't know, I guess he was spotted in Soledad, and it's funny because when Jeff walked into the Starbucks, they all said, John Wick was here. I don't think of him as John Wick. I'm just too old. I think of him as Bill and Ted or Jack Trap from Speed. I don't know, but John Wick, that's funny. I wonder if he's going to look at his life and go, I was best known not for Neo, but for John Wick.
For John Wick.
Yeah, who would have thought you could be known for something bigger than the Matrix, right?
Oh, that's funny. So I'm really excited to have Joseph. His first name is Aidan, but we've called him Joe for 23 years, but Aidan here with us because I was excited to we've talked about the gig economy, we've talked about where things are going, we've talked about psychology, and I know that your dad is really working hard to learn about, ChatGPT and AI and all these things. And I remember even in your own lifetime in the 23 years, I mean, we've seen the Bitcoin and all of these trends. What are you seeing at 23 in regard to ChatGPT and like AI and this current trend? Do you think it's something that is worthy to be invested in moving forward, or is this one of those things that is just going to be a fortnight to us all?
What do you mean by investing, though?
Like time, like a big part of this podcast, the Jeff Heilman Project, we talk about reading and like personal growth and investing our time, our most valuable asset, into something is getting to know ChatGPT, is getting to know AI, something that you find as a 23-year-old, something that you could devote your next 5 to 10 years studying.
For sure. So I think ChatGPT is not going away anytime soon. So it's going to separate people into two categories, and that's people who use ChatGPT and people who don't. And what I think is going to happen in the future with ChatGPT is that it's not really going to take people's jobs away. I think that's something that a lot of people were scared of. Is that, okay, now, the whole copywriting industry is done because the ChatGPT was going to do it. No, I don't think so at all. I think instead of the two categories being, these are the jobs that AI does and these are the jobs that the people do, it's going to be, ChatGPT isn't going to push people out. people who use ChatGPT are going to push people who don't use ChatGPT out, because it's like it's got so much potential to just take a creative thought that you have and just speed up the process. So I do think it's worth investing in learning how to use it. I think you should start with your goal and then use ChatGPT to help you achieve it a little bit faster. I don't think you should make knowing how to best use ChatGPT and just knowing all of the ins and outs and all of the little tricks that you can use. I don't think that's a good investment of time, but I think using it is.
That's good. That's a good point. What do you have to say, honey?
Well, while Joe was talking, I was just thinking about like a car. You know, cars didn't get rid of people's jobs. Cars created the biggest boom in the job market in the history of the world up to that point. But it created net new jobs. And people with cars, just like what Joseph said, just replaced people that had horse and buggy or people that walked. So I think Joe's absolutely right. The people that have ChatGPT and use it to do their jobs are going to end up replacing and pushing out of the marketplace people that for one reason or another just won't use the tools available to them because they won't be as productive.
Do you use it currently? How do you use it, Jeff?
Well, right now, the biggest thing that I'm using ChatGPT for is education. So I'll take something that I don't know about and I'll put a prompt in and say, you know, give me 3 scenarios where XYZ makes sense. You know, explain this product to me and the top 3 competitors and their product positioning in the marketplace so that I'm more educated when I go into meetings with customers about not only the products I sell, but the products that my competitors sell against me so that I can set up the battlefield in sales scenarios and make it easier for the customer to come to a decision where our products are at the top.
So, Aidan, can you explain to me, because I think that being your age, you've got a vernacular that I can better understand as far as like simplifying. Can you simplify, like, how is ChatGPT and what we're talking about, how is that different than just Google search or Wikipedia something?
So ChatGPT isn't, as far as I know, it doesn't have access to the internet yet. So you can't, if there is a news story that happened yesterday, you can't ask ChatGPT about it. It's not current. It's maybe a year behind or 2 years behind as far as like world events. And like if you ask them who the president was in 2023, it would say that year hasn't happened yet. But I think, so Google is going to give you current information. ChatGPT, you know, it might be a little bit dated. But I like using ChatGPT for research, kind of like Dad said, because first of all, you're not going to get, I'm hesitant to say a biased response, because Google, you're going to get a biased response. Google's very woke. Google's very much, advertisements come up at the top kind of thing. ChatGPT, with the exception of a couple little woke cracks, is unbiased. So if you want an unbiased answer, I'd say faster get one from ChatGPT than you would from Google.
All right. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Jeff?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good description.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's cool to be able to sit and talk about the things that are kind of current and what's going on in the current culture and the current atmosphere. Joe, I heard you refer to woke. What do we know as 40-somethings woke as being?
Well, it's a little bit stigmatized.
Yes.
Nobody's using woke in a complimentary term.
Like a Karen. Poor Karen. Sorry, if your name's Karen out there, I'm so sorry.
But Karens aren't usually woke. I think that's actually the opposite. Karens are a little bit like dinosaurs.
Okay.
But they're just, I don't know. But when I say woke, it is shamelessly progressive. Like social justice warriors who are going around getting pissed off on behalf of people who they've never met and who they will never meet, and who they really don't care about. I think woke is just, it's like a hive mind. It's like, it's stigmatized, and it's like, you don't know why you're defending these people other than
lemmings, right? They all
Yeah.
run off the cliff together. I've recently heard the term being edgy for the sake of edginess. It's like just doing something because it just is doing something, and it even almost loses its prowess, I guess, because it's all collective. And so it's just interesting. It's interesting to hear you talk about it that way, and I understand that that's what that makes sense. What do you find, Jeff, in the corporate world, in the cultures of? Are you finding now that the last election has kind of come and gone, and that under this, administrations come, administrations go. I'm not bashing on anybody's administration. I guess what I'd like to talk about more is like, has the sensitivity started to wear off when everybody was like walking around on eggshells and just trying not to offend anybody? Like, are you starting to find that in corporate America to where people are going past that, or is it still very much a culture of, dotting your I's, crossing your T's, and like attempting a modeled perfection?
Well, first of all, I think that's a very good question, Jessica. And I think the answer is, it could be simple and it could be complex. But let's take a middle of the road answer on that and break it down into a couple pieces. The first piece is corporate America is like a country in that not everybody thinks the same way, does the same thing, has the same beliefs as somebody in a different country. So, for example, I think it really goes from company to company. There are more left-leaning cultures, companies like Apple, Google, certainly Facebook, Netflix, Salesforce.com. They tend to lean left because their leaders lean left. And I think that the temptation for anybody in a position of influence to break one way or the other on a political bias is so great that it's almost impossible to ignore. Mm-hmm. So really the cultures are going to be a reflection of the founders and the leadership. And not all leaders in corporate America break left.
Yeah.
Now that said, what I do think is that shareholders, who are the real owners of corporate America, are much more interested in long-term compound growth of the value of the asset of their business. And that in order to do that, the overall view that I see is that woke is like it's like a disease that you can't get rid of. And so, but it goes dormant sometimes. And so it's only treated when it pops up, right? Like, I don't know, herpes or hepatitis. Like you live with it.
Yeah.
And you only treat it when it gets inflamed. When it gets inflamed, there's a bunch of resources that flow to that disease to try to treat it. And then as soon as the disease goes into remission, we're back to printing money.
Sure.
Like you provide enough ointment to get the disease to go into remission, and then you're back to business as usual as soon as they stop making noise. And that just seems to be, in general, regardless of the culture of a company, because it's really about getting attention. And so if there's an outbreak and they need to get attention, then they'll get the attention and they'll get the ointment, and people will placate them, and yeah, okay, all right, you're doing your woke thing, that's fine.
So in all fairness, though, I mean, I know that we have listeners and watchers that go right, and we have ones that go left. And what I hear you saying is, obviously, clearly, we're more leaning on the conservative side, and you're calling that a disease. Would you also think that they would think that ours is the disease, the right side is the disease, and so because of this, both left and right looking at the other as a disease, that it almost begins to come into a harmonious relationship between progressive and conservative, and that as we work on that balance, that's kind of the rhythm of where a country or a community is going.
Well, keep in mind, I'm not expressing a personal point of view on that. It's more that the shareholders look at it this way, right? Because they're the ones calling the shots. And shareholders don't like disruption. They don't like paying attention to anything other than just do your job and keep printing money and keep adding dollars to the coffers so that the stock price goes up. Continue with your research and development, continue with your acquisitions so that you can have unique streams of income that are protected against the risk of an outbreak of negative attention, which would discourage public sentiment from investing in and doing business with XYZ company.
Like Bud Light.
So simply said,
and Dylan Mulvaney and that.
Yeah. And Bud Light's an example. Target's another example, right? Their corporate stockholders are pushing the culture in a certain direction in order to placate the people making noise so that they'll stop making noise and people can get back to spending money. Mm-hmm. And, I would say if conservatives were loud and noisy and trying to get people's attention and trying to say, we're not being treated fairly and all that stuff, then of course that's going to come across to stockholders like a disease.
Yeah, they're going to want that to go too. Yeah, I have a very right-leaning friend who was just telling me the other day, like praying, like, oh man, I just hope Google and Facebook don't pull out of California. I hope that they stay left. And so you've got the situation to where like our local economy here in the Bay Area is depending on those left-leaning or those those things that are keeping them within this local economy, because if they decided to pick up and move out of the area, these massive companies, then we're definitely not going to be able to continue to progress as a community. So it's definitely interesting. It definitely does lean towards area that you live. Like we know, Montana, Idaho, these other areas are definitely going to be in a certain bend to it. But I find it very interesting. I think it was, Voltaire who was talking about, without tragedy, there's no joy. C.S. Lewis, the same thing. Like we have to understand that with pain comes happiness on both sides of the spectrum.
That's right.
The ebb and the flow, the yin and the yang, right? So it is, I believe this episode will be airing on the 4th of July. Happy 4th of July, everybody. Happy Independence Day. What year are we at in America? Honey, have you done the math? 1776, right? We're getting close to...
Yeah, it depends on how you count it, because the fighting wasn't really over until early 1780s. But I would say, and as we learned from some history around the Battle of Lexington and Concord over the last couple of weeks, the fighting for freedom, the actual militia taking up arms, started in April of 1775. So we're coming up on almost 250 years.
Well, happy birthday, America. You've been through a lot. As I was doing research for Sunday's service, I was doing all of the numbers. I was trying to if you take the French and Indian War and the Mexican War, and there was, I think, one or two other, and you kind of batch those together, because that was like 52 years of fighting. And then you go from the beginning, 1775, to what they consider now the global war on terror, which we're evidently currently in. America has been participating through military or battling every 15 years. On the average, every 15 years we are in some form of a military war or battle in order to achieve some form of peace, in order to achieve some form of harmony, in order to right some sort of a wrong. And obviously there's financial, benefit sometimes in the situation of the military and all of that. But it's really an interesting situation to look at. Speaking of yin and yang, speaking of balance, speaking of positive and negative, light and dark, is that we are constantly in a fight. I think that's just what it boils down to. So what does the fight look like for the 20-somethings? Like, what fight are you guys fighting right now, Joe or Aidan?
Well, it's just like we're all living our 20-something-year-old lives, right? Like the fight is the girl doesn't text you back. The fight is you didn't get you failed your menu test. Now you got to take it again. The fight is, your friends, you get FOMO because your friends went out and you didn't. FOMO is fear of missing out. And I've been grateful enough to find out at a pretty young age that I can control my attitude. So I think the fight is mostly not for me. um, it's mostly, and it doesn't stop after you turn 20. I don't think it's mostly just the fight is coming to terms with things that you can't control. A lot of the 20-somethings I meet are just, every 20-year-old has a hard time. It's just like, we don't have money, we don't have experience, we don't really know how to talk to people, we're all socially awkward. So 20-year-olds have a hard time. But I think the biggest struggle for 20-somethings is just not knowing that it'll probably be okay.
Right.
Because it's like, we all look for something in the future that is going to make us happy. We do like a deferred payment plan for our happiness. We say, I'll be happy when I graduate college. And then you've graduated college, I'll be happy when I get a job. You get a job, okay, I'll be happy when I get the house. Okay, you get the house. I'll be happy when I get the house paid off. Okay, now the house is paid off. Now I'm 65.
Right.
Huh, great. I feel so good. I finally made it. And that's, I think, something people are especially subject to when they're younger, because they don't have, it's like when you're 5 years old, you can't see 2 days ahead because you're 5. When you're 10 years old and you have a birthday party, someone says, yeah, you're going to have another birthday party next year. And that's just this totally astronomical concept. You can't understand a year out. But then when you get to 20, you can see like maybe a couple of years out. Then when you get to 30, you can see like 10 years out. Then when you get to 40, you have a midlife crisis, because now you can see the end of your life.
Right.
Yeah, I think the biggest trouble for 20-year-olds and young people in general is just not having that perspective behind you. And, you're going through a problem, and it is just, I'm sure you can look back at the problems you had when you were 20 and see just how small they are. But they don't feel small because you don't have that hindsight.
And perhaps that's why, most of the recruiting for the military and for these battles comes from very short-sighted 18 to 25-year-olds who are just living for right now, right today. And those are our soldiers. Those are the ones, anybody who's had family in the military, or even, heaven forbid, lost young men and women in the military, that's what this country's been founded on, is the backs and the shoulders of people who are just able to be okay living right now, and whether that is a blessing or a curse, we're just very thankful that we've been able to become as far as we've come on the shoulders of so many young people that's all that they had was right then, right in front of them. Where are you what is your currently, everybody? Aidan is in college. What are you doing?
I study psychology. Well, okay. So I did 2 years of community college. I studied communications, and that was fresh out of being homeschooled. So I'm sure you guys have talked about homeschooling your kids.
Yeah.
Because you talk about it with the guy in the elevator. You probably talk about it on the podcast.
We talk about it on the podcast, yes.
So it was homeschooled and straight into college, and then COVID hit. Didn't want to go to college online, so I did 2 years of outside sales, selling home improvement services, and then I got a little bit burnt out, got tired of working with 60 and 70 and 80-year-olds, wanted to be around young people, so I quit the job and started a path to go back to college. Now, today, I have been to orientation for my new college. It's a state university, California. But I haven't started taking classes yet. But I will. I've pivoted from communications to psychology, and I'm excited about it. It's going to be more work than I've ever done, because I got the new job and I've started working as a waiter, and then I'm going to be taking 16 credits per semester. So I'm just getting ready to operate at a higher level than I have.
What is it about psychology that entices you to want to do the 16 course credits and devote the next 2 years of your life?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not even going to be the next 2 years, though. It's like it's the last 3 years or 4 years and the next rest of my life. I think psychology is just so applicable, and I think the most interesting thing in the world is people. So, and it just everybody's so unique. I think the problem with wokeism and politics in general is that it can be a little dehumanizing. It's easier to attack somebody when you don't see them as a person, when you just see them as a bigot or as a woke character. But people are so complex. There's so much going on. You know, especially when you compare people to animals and you start to think about, okay, how complex is the most complex animal? Okay, the most complex animal are orcas, like killer whales. Very smart. They learn, they remember, they communicate with each other just in a very sophisticated way, much more than people realize. It just sounds like, but they're really having political conversations. But even then, a killer whale has to abide by its instincts. It can't create, it can't visualize, it doesn't have imagination. So if the most complicated being second to us is a number 2 out of 10, we're a number 500 out of 10. There's no explaining it. I mean, you can go to 8 years, 10 years, 12 years learning about psychology and not know a tenth of what's going on in there. And I like that. I like that I could spend my whole life learning about it and learning about people, and that I know it's not going to be a waste of my time. You know, you're kind of rolling the dice when you go to college, because especially if you go to college when you're 18, what 18-year-old knows what they're going to be doing when they're 40, when they're 50, when they're 60? None of them. So I don't know what I'm going to be doing at that time. I'm sure I'll meet certain people who influence me to go in, certain directions, and I don't know what those people are doing. I don't know what they're up to. I don't know who they are. So I'd rather study something I'm interested in.
That's a really good point and good perspective. I mean, when your dad and I were going through our 18 through 20s in college, everybody was pushing, you got to learn computer science. And we're like, they don't even do C++, or, I don't even know. I don't know the terms because I didn't go to computer science, because we all knew, like, this is going to be gone. Nobody's even going to be using these computers in the next 2 years. This is going to be outdated by the time we graduate college. And so that's awesome to hear you say that you're picking a field in which that you can never completely tap, and that it will not waste your time. Hey, Jeff, what do you think? This is your son talking. How are you feeling about hearing what your son's having to say?
So I'm taking it all in, and if you look at ChatGPT, if you look at Bitcoin, if you look at the issues that are stemming from just attention being inundated, what I'm hearing from Joseph is that he is looking at bringing all of these things together in a way to serve people. And I want to bring, for the audience's attention and edification, I want to bring us back to the fact that, Joseph, you already did this in 2 separate experiments in commerce and social media. One being your Instagram channel that had almost 400,000 followers at one point that you built. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
For sure.
And what you learned about human behavior and how that got you interested in controlling your attitude and psychology. And then the follow-on question for that is, Act 2 was your 2 years in professional outside sales, meeting in the homes with customers face-to-face, hundreds and hundreds of times during COVID, and what you learned about people in that environment.
Sure. So the first thing is service. It's got to come first. You got to ask questions about them before you go into yourself. It's like people, I heard this from Dad, it's people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it's all about service. But I like to keep it real. I'm not just such a nice guy that I just love walking around and giving people exactly what they want. I get what I want by giving people what they want. And big reason why I study psychology is because everybody has the same needs, and you can learn a lot about what people want and how they respond to the way you are in psychology. So, like with the Instagram account, I couldn't have grown it past a few hundred followers if I hadn't made connections earlier with people who were already successful, accounts that were already successful. And the way I did that was by teaching myself how to do some graphic design work, and just started cold DMing a bunch of these pages who just had a picture of Iron Man or Captain America or Batman as their logo or as their profile picture. I said, hey, your account's got 100,000 followers. Why does your profile picture look like you came up with it, while you were on a plane half asleep?
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
So what I would do is I say, hey, I'll give you a new profile picture. You don't have to do anything. Just shout out my page. Just post what I made for you on your page,
sure.
and then drive me some traffic, whatever. So I did that. I didn't do it for very long, maybe only a couple months or a few months, but it was talking with these people, I didn't meet them, that inspired me to actually start my own account. And then by the time I was ready to start it, I already had a support group, and I could get advice from them. We did mutual shout out for shout outs all the time. Shout out for shout out. S for S, S for S,
Yep,
S for S, S for S, S for S, S for S, just all the time. And just sharing followers and sharing ideas and sharing posts. And it was very organic. But like I said, it was service first. It was give them. I couldn't have built the account if I didn't have the connections, and I wouldn't have had the connections if I didn't start with giving. And then with the home improvement business, it was the same. It was giving your best, not with the expectation that you're going to get theirs, but for the sake of improving the picture you have of yourself. And if the picture you have of yourself is of one that is somebody who always puts their best foot forward, then you're going to start to attract other people who put their foot forward. And it's usually people who put their foot forward who are more likely to buy the roof or buy the solar or just go for it. It's like affirmative action. So I think, to just say it again concisely, it starts with service and ends with you getting what you want. It's not just, this isn't charity. Yeah. I'm not just such a nice guy. I mean, I think I'm a nice guy.
Well, we think you're a nice guy. So if I could, Jeff, did that answer your question before I ask Aidan another question?
Brilliant.
Okay.
Yeah, that would not what I expected. It was over and above what I would have expected from you, Joe. Mm-hmm. But not a surprise. Very, very well said.
So I would like to throw myself under the bus a little bit, if I can, by saying that this is Aidan, the grown 23-year-old. A lot of people that are listening and our listeners are interested in the homeschooling atmosphere, obviously, and we have been open and talked about the unschooling. And so, I'm not going to be offended at all if you say, I hated it and it was horrible, and of course I'll be glad to hear your experience, like that it was a good thing or a benefit, but you are a little bit out of it now. You did go through the pain or potential pain of going into college, coming out of being, never taking a test in your life, never being in a classroom atmosphere, going from like this grand experiment of having a high self-image and being able to tell your kids that you can do anything. A big part of going from homeschooling to college for you was being it's kind of professional, junior Olympic athlete, and then being able to also build that self-image of, being able to place and get awards for your sport and then carry that into your college. What, looking back at it now, Are there pros? Were there cons? Would you have your kids? Or were you like, absolutely not? I would never homeschool my kids. It was the worst. Or I would homeschool my kids. And like, tell us how you feel being a 23-year-old who has come through it, where there's still a lot of moms and dads that are listening right now. There's actually a large part of our audience that still have younger kids who, coming out of the pandemic, have considered homeschooling their kids and see the culture of politics and public school and all of this stuff. And they're on the fence as to whether this is a good thing or not. And I think I was not homeschooled. You were. Your dad was not homeschooled. You were. And if anybody can talk from a level of experience, it would be you. So what would you like to share about that whole thing?
I was not tremendously pumped up to be homeschooled. I was a social guy, so I wanted to be around kids and whatever. But every 12-year-old and every 14-year-old has something that
Yes.
they're ready to complain about, and theirs is school and being belittled by people, and mine was, I just want to have friends. But I had a big family, so that helped get through that time. I think something interesting I heard was that something happens from the age of 12 until the age of 24, which is that your parents are just idiots. They have no idea what they're doing. And the reason for that is because we used to all be in tribes, and it's so that we don't just live with mom and dad the whole time. And it's this thing in our psychology where it pushes us to leave the home. What pushes us to leave the home is disagreement with mom and dad. So at the time, whatever you guys did, I would have disagreed with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why it's important as a parent to have outside counsel who you trust that you know your kids are going to go to. So, just assume that between the ages of 12 and 24, your kid is going to be very disagreeable towards you and is probably going to go to other adults for advice because they don't know what's going on, but they can't go to mom and dad because of that thing that's in their psychology. That's just with everybody that forces them to go on and create their own life. So now that I've got the hindsight, though, looking back on it, I think there's no one size fits all. As far as like, will I homeschool my kids? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going to live. I don't know if I'm going to have access to good schools. I don't know if my wife is going to, I'm not married. I don't have a girlfriend, but I'm
Yes.
sure I will at some point. I don't know what she's going to want to do. And I think the most important thing is to be able to gauge whether something's working or not. Because certain kids are academic. They're academically inclined. And if you have a kid who's academically inclined, you would be doing them a disservice to keep them from having a level of higher education. And, it's not to say that you can't get a high level of education from homeschool, but, some people just are academics and they like to go to school. So I think the most important thing is just to be able to read your kid, pay attention to what they are feeling, and then just be able to improvise and be able to adapt. I've known some different people who have been homeschooled, and none of them were 100%. And I think people change, and you shouldn't be afraid to pull your kid out of school. You shouldn't be afraid to put your kid into school. You should constantly be kind of testing the waters to see what's working and what's not working.
And we tried really a big part of our, so that those that are listening, a big part of our philosophy behind the way that we educate our family is that we want to really foster a love for learning. Like, if there's any way that we can encourage our children to want to learn, to want to get more information, and if we can afford resources, like, for example, getting in order for you to have your Instagram account, because this is something that you're interested in at 15 years old, do you have the most updated phone in order to be able to do this and to be able to run this account and to be able to be, as parents, going like, is this an investment in something that we really want? Like, can we afford to do this in order to encourage you guys as individuals, even at a very young age, into whatever it is? diving, you were in your junior Olympic diving. I mean, that came at a considerable cost financially, but it was one of those things that as long as you're interested in this thing, then we need to continue to invest in it. We need to continue to see what you can learn or take away from it. So we tried. I think that people, when they have this idea of homeschooling, often from the moms and the dads that I've talked to, they have a picture of sitting at a table with a worksheet and doing like, math problems on a worksheet. And just the thought of doing that for 8 hours, or social studies or history, they take this concept of being in a desk in rows that they probably grew up with, and they visualize that and they think about that and they go, oh, heck no, I could never do that. Whereas what we were trying to do and what we have tried to do with our kids is, like, rather than get a book about trees and say, let's look at this book on trees, like, where can we go see trees in person and learn about trees that way? And so I'm hoping that that message, as far as the homeschooling part, comes across, and that hopefully, that everybody who's listening who may or may not be considering homeschooling, like Aidan was saying, that, just take each kid, the pulse of each kid. And if a kid is an academic and has, like, man, some of these kids, they wake up at 7 o'clock every morning. They have a routine. They love routine. They need routine. They have to, the thought of going to a class and sitting at a desk or whatever, doing a lab, that just fulfills them. It makes them feel awesome. And so by all means, go encourage that and do what you can in order to support that. But definitely parenting. The other day we had an episode on parenting, and it was all about actual parenting, which is being present and taking the temperature of the house. What does the child need? Each child is different. They all have different needs. I have 7 of them. No two are alike, and they're all very different. But as parenting, it means I would always say, I learn more from you guys than I could ever teach you. And as long as I have that perspective in how we're doing life together, that I think that it's going to actually turn out pretty well. What do you have to say as far as, because it wasn't always an easy decision, was it, Jeff, deciding? I mean, I think it was a pretty easy decision, like public school or no public school, but you definitely were a part of the how we choose to educate, or how we choose to get through the teenage years and the kids growing up schooling at home.
Well, I think that we've thought in terms of outcomes.
Yeah.
I'm an outcome person, right? I'm not an entrepreneur because I love stressing out every single minute of every day about making payroll, right? I'm not a software sales guy because I love, having my face kicked in every week on commit calls, or have to work every night and every weekend, regardless of, whether I'm in a hotel room or at the beach or with my family, or, that's not, I didn't do it. I didn't do those things because of the how, right? And we didn't homeschool because of the how. We didn't homeschool so that we could say, oh, we're special and we're different, and hey, everybody, look at us because we're doing a different how. Not at all. The reason we did the homeschooling was because of the outcome. Mm-hmm. When you start a business, you have an outcome already in mind before you even start. When you start a job, you have an outcome already in mind before you ever start. When you buy a house or a car or a sandwich for breakfast, there's an outcome that you're going after. And yet, I thought it was ironic that the number one most important thing we could do besides assure our own survival on this planet is to procreate and make more of us so that we can continue our own bloodlines. And yet with our progeny, we don't go in to the decisions that we make as parents oftentimes with a picture in our mind of what the outcome is. Their outcome is not the outcome of the individual or the outcome of the family. The outcome is what the institution says the outcome should be.
So what do you, I don't mean to cut you off, but I really like
Please do.
What you're saying here. Because of what you said about the how and how you didn't really worry about it. But I think a lot of people, the how stops them. And
I agree.
and it's like you might have a ton of credit card debt, you might have a bunch of cars, and the first question is, how am I ever going to pay this off? It's a question to yourself, and and it brings you down. So I want to know, what is it that you think, both of you, that causes so much worry, so much short-sightedness?
Because I think people spend a lot of time, starting with public school, being trained to look at the how. And I think that's where the worry comes from. Because I was talking to a young person yesterday. I was sitting down having some lunch and doing some art and relaxing. And I asked this young lady waiting behind the bar, I said, okay, so what's your big goal? What are you going for? What's the big hang your hat on this target? And she said, well, I've got a romantic one and a practical one. And I said, okay, well, let's start with the romantic one. She talked about she wanted to have a bed and breakfast on the beach and be able to provide comfort for people. And she was emotional about it. She said, she's an artist herself. She wants to display her art. She wants to host. She wants to be involved in the community, provide a respite for travelers. And she was really excited about it. There's a lot of emotion behind it. And then she immediately went to, but I don't see any way of doing that, so I'm probably going to go to law school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'm not putting her down at all. I'm encouraging her. I was excited to hear what her big target was.
Mm-hmm.
But the programming is so embedded in people to think about the how that it castrates the why and the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I'm sure I was trained to think that way also, but I think I just got out of the school system early enough and spent enough time around entrepreneurs and professional athletes, and immigrants and leaders of cities and countries and statesmen that they all think the same way. They're all focused on outcomes, and they let the how take care of itself. So I'm not saying there's a better way or a worse way. I'm just trying to answer your question, Joe, that the reason why there's so much fear is because people are wrapped around the axle about the how, which they don't really see or understand because they never got clarity on the why.
Well, if you look at it from the point of view of compulsory education, which means mandated, got to go to school, only became a thing, I believe, in the 1930s. So it's a relatively new system of having education. It came out of the manufacturing economy. It came from people sitting around going, how are we going to get these kids off of the farm and going and sitting into these manufactured plants and doing widgets and assembly line living. And so from the first grade now, since it's compulsory and everybody's got to make a decision of how you're going to educate your child, that we have all of these generations that from the age of 6, which is first grade, through senior in high school, practicing and spending their entire quarter, if you go on a quarter system, an entire quarter memorizing all of the answers to the test, so that when the test day comes, you know exactly what answers need to be provided in order to pass your test. And what we find as entrepreneurs is if you're going to leap, you're not going to know how. You're not going to have the answers. You're just going to be flailing. It's going to be ugly. You're not going to have the answers. And so there's this internal conflict in most people who have gone through an education system, which says you have to have all of the answers before you can be tested. So where now you're being tested or you're being asked, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to be the next Elon Musk. I want to be the next, Steve Jobs. I want to be these great guys who, by the way, many of which dropped out of traditional education because of those very reasons. Like, we have got to get through and get past this internal conflict between I cannot take my next step unless I know the ground is firm. I cannot take my next step unless I know exactly where I'm going. And because I'm so indoctrinated that in order to pass a test, which means success, I have to have all of the answers because straight A's are the objective and failure is not an option.
Yeah, I think people learn that failure is not an option because of the school system. Because
Right.
it starts with, it's like a punishment system. And a punishment system Like, yeah, an A+, great. That's what you should have gotten.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you don't get what you should have gotten, it's punishment and red Sharpies and see me after class.
Yeah.
And then
you are a slacker, or you are a daydreamer, and those are all negative.
Yeah, and I think you hit a point too. It's because the teacher, if they say that, that's they identify the student with the mistake. So if they fail a test, like you said, they'll go straight to you are a slacker.
Yep.
Instead of you failed the test. And now the kid, being an impressionable 11-year-old, hearing from this adult, he is going to accept that. And now the kid has a limiting belief that I am a slacker. And then he's going to start looking for proof of that belief. And he's going to see the other bad grades that he gets. He's going to see his socks on the floor of his room. He's going to see that the shower hasn't been cleaned in a long time. And he's going to say, man, I am a slacker. And then if nothing interrupts that pattern, there's gonna, that's how you grow up into being a slacker.
And then you get fighting thought that, it would be nice to open a restaurant or some dream, and then immediately that dream gets crushed because there's no way that you can understand how a slacker can do these big things.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you cross-reference your goals if they come up. A lot of people don't have goals. But if they do have a goal, they're immediately going to cross-reference it with their, the kind of person I am. Like that lady who you were talking to behind the bar. She has this goal, and it's a nice, dreamy goal, and it's I'm sure it's got this, it's a beautiful dream to have an inn by the beach, be able to care for people. But she took that goal, she has that dream, and every time she cross-references it with, quote-unquote, the kind of person I am, she says, I'm not the kind of person who could do that. Yeah. And then she says, okay, but I am the kind of person who could probably go to law school. So I think that's a trouble is when you cross-reference the thing you really want with the kind of person you are. The kind of person you are isn't set in stone. You can change. It's malleable. That's psychology. It's reworking your internal wiring, taking little action after little action and letting them grow into bigger, more impactful things.
So, Joe, I know that as we're winding out here, and Jeff too, if you two could both, by the way, everybody who's listening, both of these two awesome men have attended seminars, read lots of books, and have been devoted to working diligently on internal narratives. Joseph, do you have a book or a recommendation, or even YouTube, like let's talk like YouTube, TikTok, whatever, YouTube, TikTok. Is there any resources that you would encourage that you could leave our listeners with, books that you've read or seminars or anything that you've gone to that you would say, if you're going to want to work on this area and work on morphing your internal dialogue from your point of view, and then I'll ask your dad the same. Is there something that you could recommend that they could get started moving from this podcast to the next thing?
Yeah, my number one is always going to be, and has been ever since I read it, it's always going to be Psycho-Cybernetics. It's available for free on YouTube, so you don't even need to go to Audible and get the audiobook. You can just go on YouTube, search up Psycho-Cybernetics. The entire thing is on there for free, and that's everything that you're going to need.
Okay, Jeff, you have
that's by Dr. Maxwell Maltz, by the way, and it was published in 1960. Psycho-Cybernetics, and I just want to make sure it's not to be confused with Dianetics.
Yeah.
By L. Ron Hubbard.
And maybe Andrew can put the name on the bottom of the screen when we do publish this to YouTube. So.
Oh yeah, thanks Andrew for editing that in. I appreciate it. Maybe you can put a link to where you can watch it on YouTube beneath this one.
Yeah, and he's nodding. Jeff, are you just like confirming that one, or do you have something? Is there somebody right now?
I would say yes. Certainly, that's probably the best book describing what we're talking about here and really what this podcast is about. And I would go as far to say that the lessons learned in that book are the foundational principles in the most complete and closest to digest form as you can get.
And most important thing is that it's read by a excellent audiobook reader named Paul Michael, and it's edited by a guy named Dan Kennedy. And like my dad said, it was written in the 1960s, but it doesn't sound like it was written in the 1960s. It doesn't have that lingo, but it's been updated, so it's not like you're listening. It's not like you're reading the King James Version Bible with hitherto and all that kind of stuff going on. But what I really liked about the book is that it's very encouraging, and a lot of people don't have an encourager. So if you want an encourager, Maxwell Maltz is an encourager. And all throughout the book as well is provided practical things to do. So it's not just, most of the time you read a book, you're going to remember 5% of what's in it, and then maybe you'll apply 5% of that 5% to your actual life. But the book, it's so committed to making an impact. And I think it's the commitment to making an impact on people's lives that is why it's had such amazing longevity. And like we said, it's written in 1960. They sell tens of thousands of copies every year just by word of mouth. And it's because the book takes so seriously, talking about real stuff that you can really use.
I want to take one liberty, because I think it's an edgy topic. I think it's a topic that people don't talk about. And I think that the reason that they don't talk about it is pretty obvious, but I think it needs to be talked about and it needs to be fleshed out. So, Joseph, I'm not going to lead you on what to share, but in these last couple of minutes, I want to at least address the topic and let you take it from here of, we'll just call them artificial substances.
Drugs.
You can say the D word.
Can we say the D
Might
word? All right,
have to
let's
get
talk about
edited out.
drugs.
Drugs, right.
Let's talk about drugs. If you're good with it, I'm good with it.
Well,
I'd like you to.
And prefacing that, it is legal in the state of California where we're at, and it is something now that you can just purchase anywhere and actually be given.
Yeah. Well, okay, so where does this start? I used to smoke a lot of weed, and now I don't anymore. So I did because I was young and impressionable, hanging out with stoners who had a bong in their car, and then we'd go sit in the car and listen to music and smoke, and then the music would get way cooler, and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. This is like the first time I've ever heard this song. So I found it very appealing and very interesting, but it clouds your judgment, it clouds your vision, and everything's got two sides. I think there are health benefits, or I think there are potentially very good uses for it, such as helping people with worse addictions, and weed was talked about for decades and decades as the gateway drug. You start with weed and then you go on to something much worse. But I really think that for certain people, it can have the totally reverse effect. It can help them transition from maybe an opiate addiction into an opiate addiction that really is destroying their life, to a maybe just like a middle ground.
So it's like beer versus vodka.
Sure.
Yeah. Like moving from alcoholism to smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, and I'd really rather see a population of people on pot than a population of people on meth or trank dope like we have now. It is legal now. It didn't used to be when I was, in my prime. It was not legal, so it was like very hush hush, but it was like a misdemeanor or whatever.
And I found it interesting. This was when you were going to college and you were in college age. I found it interesting that when your dad confronted you, and I thought he handled it actually fairly well by just saying, these are the rules, and if you're going to continue to do this, then these are the consequences, and you're going to have to make that decision yourself. But he also presented you the question by saying, do you need help? Instead of laying down the law and saying this is the way it's going to be, and you're going to do this and you're going to do that, and you said you needed you needed help, and so then we tried to help as best as we could. But it was important to recognize that you were the one that needed to get yourself. You had to make the decision to get yourself out of it.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And so you decided you decided that you weren't. And another thing that really stood out in my mind during that time when we were having conversations about it was you were saying, like, I took this personality trait that I know that I have as a winner. And if anybody was going to do drugs, I was going to do the most. And if anybody was going to do this, then I was going to I was going to knock it out of the park. And what you were finding was that, like, almost to the point of so much so soon, so fast, added to the burnout of, like, even doing it. And, like, you were, didn't need to take very long because you were really, really good at it.
Yeah. Well, I will say that the reason I got caught was because I started smoking in the daytime. That when I first started, it was strictly nighttime, and we'd go crazy at night. But in the daytime, that was my time to operate as a human being. But then I had an interaction with a female, and it didn't go so well. So I needed a little bit of Zaza to get me through the day, and then of course, if I'm high walking around with red eyes in the daytime, talking about what did you say? It's gonna take notice, but everything worked out.
Yeah,
everything worked out for the
super
best.
proud of you. Is that what you were hoping to get to, Jeff, in the addressing?
I just wanted to open up the conversation for our audience and to say that while we are not healthcare providers, we are not certified therapists, we didn't even go to school. We are only experiential learners and experiential teachers of principles that we found that have gotten us outcomes, right? We're outcome-based people. That's what entrepreneurs and parents and homeschooling parents are. Is that I wanted to open up the conversation and say, if you want to talk to somebody about this, if you need help, if you want us to post questions about it online, then please text us back at the message, and it'll be confidential. We won't share it if you don't want us to. We'll comment and reply back to anybody that reaches out. But just to say that I think the worst thing you could do with substance abuse, consumption, or even recreational drug use that you think might be an issue is to bury it under the rug and not talk about it. And then all of a sudden there's emotions related to that identity topic we were talking about earlier, that I'm not doing good or I'm not a winner or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that can be gotten rid of independently of the substance usage. And then the substance usage in many cases will take care of itself, or at least be more manageable, so where you can go and get the help that you need. So that's why I'm not telling Joseph what to say. I'm just having a conversation.
And I think if, think about addiction, and people say you can't get addicted to weed. You can. And for, a year, it was an addiction. I have no problem saying I was addicted to weed. And the thing is, as it progresses, you enjoy it less and you need it more. Mm-hmm. It creates kind of this circle, this loop of, okay, I don't feel good. Why don't I feel good? It's because I don't have weed. Now, okay, get some weed. Now you feel good. So the only problem that weed solves is the problem that weed creates. And the only way to get out of that loop is just to stick your hand out. It's just there's no secret. There's no, how do I do this? Oh, I wonder what little things am I going to need to do to get out of this loop? Oh my God, it's like we were saying, the how stops people. There's no how. You know what you have to do if you're in that circle. You just got to stick your hand out of the circle and break through. And it's going to hurt because your hand is in this. It feels like when you've been 2 days without it, you've been 3 days without it, it feels like your hand is in one of those grinders that you see on TikTok where they throw the bicycle in and it just like eats it up. That's what it feels like. But you got to stick your hand in there. And it does help if you have something to grab onto, which is a reason why. So, and then you can pull yourself out of the circle. But if you don't have anything to grab onto, then it just feels like you're sticking your hand in a grinder, if that makes sense.
How do people find? Do you think that the why is just from inspiration? Do you think the why is from your environment? I know we talk a lot about like breaking your association. Like obviously, if your besties are all stoners, you're gonna have to make that's a pretty big move to say, I'm not gonna hang out with these people anymore.
Yeah, and I don't think that's it. It would make a big change, and sometimes people need a very radical change. I don't think that like the people I was smoking with, they didn't have bad intentions, and they weren't dumb either. Um, they just kind of found themselves there. Um, and now that I don't smoke anymore, we still hang out because
Yeah.
I still hang out with those guys.
Well, there's a lot of people that we knew like that went through the 70s, and they're friends. They kind of went through their experimental phase, right?
Yeah. So when I say like sticking your hand out of the circle so that you can get out of the loop, that can take different forms. It can be in the form of, your friend calls you on Friday night to go smoke and you say, I'm so busy tonight. That's like sticking your fingers. And then the next Friday they call again, that's sticking your hand. And then the next Friday they call again, that's sticking your arm. Why don't you ever smoke with us anymore? Why don't you hang out? Oh my God, dude. And now you're going to get the resistance. And that's when you really, really feel it. So that might be the way to do it for you. It might not be the way to do it for you. But another way you can stick your hand out of the circle is by starting something which is going to require the mental capacity, which you can only get by stopping. And if you start it, you're more likely to finish it. And it's like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? And it might only take that one step to starting a new job or to picking up a couple classes at community college, or just place a demand on yourself, and you may find that sticking your hand out of the circle that way is a little bit better, and it might give you something to grab onto. Because when you just drop your friends, you don't, okay, now I've stuck my hand out, but I don't have any reason why. I just know that, maybe I just want to get out of the loop, but like, you don't really want to get out of the loop, right? So if you place a demand on yourself that's going to require more cognitive ability, then that's what, with like quality first. There's no way I could have done that job while smoking weed. I was crystal clear. So
Took everything. Yeah.
it took everything out of me. I guess I could have, but I wouldn't have made any money.
Yeah.
You were in straight commission. You certainly could have, but you would not have made any money. Well, Joe, you bring that up, and recently, and so that those that are listening or those that are watching, your dad and I were in an environment. We were hanging out with a group of people where we were gathering together at a social event, and they were passing around. They were passing a joint around, and like, hey, you want this, and I actually, and we're 40, 50 something year olds passing this around, and I'm looking at it and I'm going, I've personally never done it, never tried it. I'm thinking to myself, the level of sobriety that it requires to do what I do. And I'm not judging them. I mean, this is California. This is like, we're having a good time. It's a social gathering. It has become, smoking weed has become social, just like having a cocktail. I'm not opposed to having a cocktail. I'm not opposed to doing these things. But I know my limitations with alcohol. I've never been exposed to marijuana to the point to where I know what my limitations are because I've never done it and I don't intend to do it. But the level of sobriety that is required for me to do what I have to do, and my comment to them, they, of course, were of the age where there's no peer pressure involved. It's just, hey, you want this, or you don't, because nobody's going to judge people at our age anyway, whether we say no. But I just had to say, I said, I know that when I get that phone call at 2 a.m. in the morning, which would happen if I partake in what you're passing, if I am not able to answer the call for my kids at 2 o'clock in the morning, then I just know that this is the level of sobriety that I need. Thank you very much, but no. And I think that people might judge us, especially me being a pastor and your dad being, having podcasts and everything, and say, well, how could you even find yourself in that situation? But we have to remember that if you're going to have faith of any kind, if you're going to call yourself a Christian or whatever, that Jesus did not ignore sinners. He was with the taxmen. He was with the Pharisees would consider him being with the lowliest of the low. And these are not low people. These are super successful executives that now see these types of drugs like marijuana as just another cocktail. And you cannot avoid people, and people are going to have their things.
I think it's important to note too that peer pressure isn't like it is in the movies. In the movies, it's, oh, man, oh, you're pussy, man. You can't, you're not even going to smoke the joint, man. It's not like that at all. It's like all the cool kids are over there doing that, and I'm here all by myself.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you want to hang out with the cool kids, you got to do the cool kids things. And when you are fully developed, such as yourselves, you're not going to be as, like you said, subject to that peer pressure, not because people aren't judging you, but because you don't feel like you need to go join, you feel like you're cool already. You don't need to go be with the cool kids. You don't need to smoke to be cool.
So thank you. And this has been a lovely time together. It's been a great hour plus. We really appreciate anybody who's listened today. We appreciate your likes, your shares, your comments. Let us know. Aidan's here, and we're here, and we just want to be able to continue this dialogue. Jeff, would you like to say anything in closing before we wrap it up and time out?
Yeah, I just want to give Joe a chance. How can people follow you on social media, Joe? How can they find you and reach out if they want to have sideline conversations?
Do you have anything going on?
Anything going on in school, and I'm starting a new job as a waiter, so nothing loud. But if you want to follow my Instagram, it's just Aidan, AIDAN Heilman. I know you know how to spell that one because it's right
on the podcast.
It's on the podcast. But yeah.
Awesome, everybody. Thank you for tuning into this episode. We look forward to having our next dialogue and continuing the conversation, as always, with you and being as open as we possibly can about these subjects. Thank you for everything, and God bless, and have an awesome rest of your week, and happy 4th of July. Peace be with you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.